Team. How the devil are we? I hope all is well. Welcome back to another episode of the High Performance Coach podcast. Today, I'm joined by an incredibly special guest. We have recently become connected and have communicated on a more kind of personal and deeper level over the last few months. But prior to that, I'd actually been a super fan, and I'd watched from afar from 2014, which is actually one of the first messages that I sent back to Pat. And I've been able to watch this guy go on an incredible journey, and have just sat almost in the shadows and have seen him grow, evolve, have a huge impact, and has just stepped into a whole host of different roles and is really changing the world for the better. So I'm unbelievably excited about having the opportunity just to shoot the shit more so than anything else with somebody that I admire, I respect, and somebody who I believe is doing incredible things. Pat, welcome to the podcast.
Wow. Thank you, bro. I always love your energy, and I'm humbled that you have been aware of me for a while. So thank you. Yeah.
Dude, my mission is to create a connected and authentic world by allowing space for me and others to live with compassion, curiosity, and play. Something that you said last year as your vision and your mission and what it is that you wanted to be able to see from the world. Where did that come from? Or what's driving it?
So I've gone to a lot of personal development, healing, all sorts of retreats for the last 15 years. I was in the fitness industry for a while, but since I was a teenager, I've been interested in personal development, and I'm 36 now. So 20 years, maybe more, of a fascination by kind of why we do what we do and what drives us and all that kind of stuff. And one of the retreats I went to, a big part of the retreat was around mission and purpose and the importance of that, particularly for the masculine. Of course, for everyone, but I think men in particular need that sense of mission and purpose to feel a sense of value in the world, a sense of direction. And we did an exercise around kind of crafting your mission, and they give us a nice framework for it. So from what I remember, the framework looked largely at the wounds that you felt you had from when you were younger. So what was lacking or missing in your life that you needed, that you didn't have. And for me, I lacked connection and I lacked authenticity. I felt I couldn't be myself, and I felt I didn't fit in. So that drives kind of what you can create in the world. So your wound becomes the womb, in a sense. So what I didn't get, I want to create now. And that's how my healing happens. And that's potentially how other people's healing. So that's the first part of it, is I create a connected and authentic world. So again, what was lacking for me. And then you start to think about, well, how do I tangibly do that? And for me, it's creating a space where people can come and be themselves, whether that's a men's group where I bring men together, or it's a breathwork group, or it's a corporate group, or even back to the fitness days. At its peak, when I was doing fitness 10 years ago, I had 550 people run a Tough Mudder race as part of a team. And that kind of thing is like, okay, what am I doing here? It's fitness, but really it's beyond fitness. It's a space where people can go beyond how they see themselves. So that's where the mission came from. And just as a kind of carry on from that, something that might be useful for the listeners is, when you know your mission, you can also identify your shadow mission, which is almost the opposite. So my shadow mission is I create a disconnected and inauthentic world by living in distraction, busyness, and noise. And the value of knowing that is I can just as easily live that way. I can just as easily fill my mind with noise and clutter and distraction and everything else. And so I think it's great to know where you're going. It's also great to have the opposite in mind so that you can just catch yourself. So if your mission is to, instill your clients with confidence and clarity, your shadow mission is probably that you instill your clients with confusion and self-doubt. And there's probably ways that you do that unconsciously. So I think it's good to know both sides.
And what do we need to understand about Pat in order for us to be able to appreciate now why you do what you do? Because from 2014 to 2024, from when I've kind of watched you, I'm sure there was a story behind that, which we'll come into. Like, what do we now need to know or understand to appreciate what's kind of really driving the evolution?
Yeah, funny. I was on a business podcast last week. It's called the Entrepreneur Experiment, and I was saying to him I was laughing a bit because I don't really see myself as an entrepreneur anymore. I did back in the day. Um, I see myself as an adventurer in the sense of like internal and external. I just want this life to be an adventure, and I suppose what people would need to know about me is I'm always questioning who I am and who I'm not, and going beyond my I know for myself early on, I put myself in a very small box. I'm this and I'm this and I'm this and I'm not anything else. So there was a fear of showing a lot of who I was. So my life, I feel, is about reclaiming more and more of who I am, because my work is all around how we come into the world with pure potential and a million different ways to express ourselves. And then as we get older, we start to condition ourselves. So I'm an adventurer, and I'm a curious, open, student and teacher.
And what are you currently exploring and curious around?
Breath work is obviously always something that I'm big on. Shadow work is my biggest passion, probably. The breath work ties in with shadow work, which we'll probably talk about. I'm exploring different jujitsu, pieces that I'm going down rabbit holes. I've trained jujitsu for about, I don't know, close on 10 years probably, and that's a passion. And what else am I exploring? I'm exploring free diving. I'm going to Egypt in a couple of weeks to explore free diving. I'm exploring. Actually, this is like a bit of an edge maybe to share, but I'm exploring something called a feminine cleanse, which is work from John Wineland, and it looks at how men relate to the feminine or to women, and basically what John talks about is how often we try to get our validation or approval or our needs met or a million different things through women. And I was looking at my own patterns and I was saying, since I've been a teenager, I've chased women or I've, wanted to be in a relationship or, and so I'm actually doing something for a few months of deliberately stepping away from any type of dating or just to see what it brings up for me, like the insecurities and the fears it brings up for me, the sadness it brings up for me, all that kind of stuff. Because John's take on it is that uh, there's a million ways, maybe as men, and again, women will have a similar experience, maybe, but as men, we might try to get little hits off the feminine. So I go to the coffee shop and the cute barista smiles and it makes me feel better about myself temporarily. And so his take is that if I'm always trying to get from other people, am I actually bringing something to it? Or am I just trying to take all the time? And I thought it was interesting. So he says, take a couple of months and really look after all those parts of yourself, your own insecurities, your own fears, your own self doubt. And then when you're ready for a relationship because you're not trying to take from the person, you're coming from a full cup. So that's something else I'm exploring, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. What is your shadow?
My shadow personally or shadow in general?
Shadow in general.
Okay. The shadow is the parts that you've rejected, hidden, or denied. So we all have it. It lies outside of our conscious awareness. So the simplest way of thinking about it is baby Joe comes into the world for the first couple of months. Everything is welcome. He cries, he laughs, he dances. He's got no shame. He's got no expectations on himself. He hopefully experiences unconditional love. At that point, you won't even know who you are. You won't see yourself as separate. So babies talk about themselves in the third person, like Pat hungry, Pat need. And then we get to maybe 2 or 3 or 4 and we differentiate, which means we see ourselves as separate. So we start saying, rather than Pat hungry, I'm hungry. So now I'm so I'm a separate identity. And when we become separate to the world, we start to develop a sense of who we are. And as we develop a sense of who we are, we develop a sense of who we're not. So that just happens instinctively. So simple examples, we get these messages as kids, boys don't cry. So, okay, my identity is I don't cry. So my persona is I'm stoic. And then what goes into shadow is my emotion. I hide half of who I am. So the first couple of years, we get all these rules from our schooling, from our teachers, our friends, our peers, our family, thousands of conditions or experiences where we say, okay, it's safe to show this. So it's dangerous to show this. Maybe I learned from my father that it's important to be hardworking. And so a lot of us will put our laziness into shadow and we think that laziness is bad. But really, laziness could be a different word for self care, depending on the context. And so the idea is most of us have shut off from half of who we are. We've made anger wrong. We've made grief wrong. We've made our sexuality wrong. We've made so many our desires wrong, our needs. We've made, people talk about being needy. There's a difference between being needy and actually having needs. It's healthy to have needs. So shadow work then is about exploring what parts of me have I hidden away and what might the value be in bringing those out. One example I often give is that a lot of us learned that anger was bad or wrong. And so we pushed it away. And then as adults, we have a very hard time expressing ourselves and what we need, or putting a boundary in place, or saying no. We become people pleasers and we think the anger has gone away, but of course it's not. It's manifested in different ways. It's either anger toward ourselves for not sticking up for ourselves, or it's a resentment towards someone else. And so shadow work is let's explore these, not as children that put things in good and bad boxes, but adults that can see the context in all traits.
And how would one start to explore these? Where would you suggest that they start? What would be a good kind of piece to gain traction?
One thing you can do is to list the traits or the values that you really admire in people. Think about 3 people you really admire and list the traits that you admire about those people. These are what we call golden shadow behaviors. So we don't just hide the bad stuff or the stuff that we think is wrong. We also hide the stuff that was too much. So as a kid, if you're very outgoing and loud and boisterous, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but maybe you were told you were too much, so you hid that part of yourself. And then oftentimes as we get older, we look at our heroes and really they're showing us our golden shadow. They're mirroring back aspects of ourselves that maybe we've disconnected from. So I worked with a lady years ago and she was beating herself up because she'd watch hours of SAS Who Dares Wins. And I was asking her, like, what's that giving you? What are you connecting with? And she was projecting her sense of adventure onto the screen. She had disconnected from adventure. Her life had gotten a bit boring. And so she was projecting outwards something that was within her. So oftentimes life is mirroring. So the exercise people could do is think about the people you admire. What are the traits you admire in them? And how can you or how do you demonstrate those same traits? So how are you demonstrating those? And then on the flip side, think about the people that you really don't like, that you're challenged by, that you struggle with. Think about the things you don't like in them and then humble yourself enough to be able to say, okay, I've got a bit of that as well. I've got a bit of that as well. So you might look at a politician and say, oh, he's greedy. He only cares for himself. Then I'm going to point it back to myself. Where am I greedy and where do I only care for myself? And two things happen in this. One is you start to humanize the other person rather than making them a hero or a villain. You see them as a human that's walking alongside you. And you also have a better understanding of self. And it's not that I reclaim my anger and I start going around being angry to everyone. It's actually the opposite. It's like a martial artist. I now understand the power that I have and I'm more careful with how I use it.
And who are the 1 to 3 people in Pat's world that he's currently modeling or looking at their golden shadow and is looking at their traits and characteristics and is seeing that as a North Star?
Joe Parrish.
I'll slip you that 10 later.
um, I could use you as an example in this moment. So, like things I admire about you, I admire your clarity, admire your generosity, and I admire your energy. So those would be three things that I admire in you. And so then I might explore, where does my generosity live? It might not look the same as how you show generosity, but I'm just going to play with that. Where's my generosity? And if I'm challenged to find it, then that's an opportunity for me to lean more into that. Your energy, I really admire your energy. And I'm like, oh, Joe, he always brings so much energy and so much enthusiasm and shares that with people so graciously. And then I ask myself, where's my energy? And it doesn't need to look the same as yours, but it's like, okay, can I awaken that part of me? Um, uh, Outside of yourself, who am I admiring? Mm, I look a lot actually, funnily, to older people, like people in their 70s and 80s for some reason. I'm kind of I think it's down to the fact that there's so much noise now on the internet with, there's so many people, of course, and it's magic what it's given us. But it's nice for me at least to look at people a couple of decades older and say, wow, they've really lived and they've probably been through. I think life, when we take the bigger picture of life, there's so many ups and downs, and it feels very extreme in the moment, like you're way up and then you're down. But over the course of a lifetime, it's a pretty steady line. It all balances out. And I think the older people have that perspective. So I admire older people that have a sense of freedom within themselves. That's a value. That's probably the value that I admire the most in people, is a sense of freedom. They let themselves be who they really are. They don't have kind of conditions on themselves.
Mate, I wholeheartedly agree and can massively appreciate that. If I look at it through my lens, obviously the one probably biggest like North Star or person in my life has always been my granddad. And
Mm,
again, like there's so much wisdom within there, and it's not actually what he says, but it's what he does.
yeah.
And it's that behavior, and for me, that gives you so much more like calm and peace and certainty and confidence within oneself, which is, I think, amazing. So, mate, I hear you, and I absolutely love that. Why do you think people avoid doing the inner work? And you mentioned something on a podcast a while ago where you talked about like you're either revolving or evolving.
Mm, yeah. Revolving or evolving is kind of the nature of the shadow is that if we don't address what's really driving things in our lives, we'll create the same thing again and again. So Carl Jung has a very famous quote. Carl Jung was an Austrian psychoanalyst and the founder of Jungian psychology. And he would say, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So until you make the unconscious conscious, it will run your life or direct your life and you will call it fate. Effectively, what that means is what you're not aware of. I say this is another quote. I'm quoting everyone today, but there's a great teacher called Anthony de Mello who says it maybe in more simple terms. He says, what you are aware of you're in control of, but what you're not aware of is in control of you. So the idea of revolving or evolving is, um, let's use a nutrition example. If someone learned early on that when they're very attractive and they're in great shape, they get a lot of unwanted attention, unconsciously, they may have come to the decision that I don't want this type of attention. So I'm not going to stay in really good condition. I'm going to change how I look. And so later on in life, they might be unaware that this is kind of what's driving things. It's like an iceberg. This is like the bit below the water that they can't see, the unconscious mind. And so they can try 10 different diet plans over the next 10 years and nothing's going to stick. And so they're just revolving because they haven't addressed the root of their behavior. So in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a useful form of therapy, they talk about how our thoughts impact our feelings and our feelings impact our actions and our actions impact our results. It's kind of a cycle. So if I think I can succeed, I'll feel confident. And when I feel confident, I take action. And when I take action, I see results. And these become self-fulfilling prophecies. And with that kind of way of thinking, I believe that addressing the stories that we have, both conscious and unconscious, is really important. And if you look at the personal development industry or the popular psychology industry, a lot of what people are focused on are the results and the habits. But what's driving your results and your habits is your beliefs and your feelings. So if you're not doing something to address your beliefs and your feelings, you will continue to revolve, in my judgment, at least.
I love that. There's one thing that's going on in the back of my mind that I would love to be able to just unpack even more so. And that's, you've been on such a phenomenal journey and you've evolved so much into, I believe, like different kind of roles, identities that you've now kind of played out in terms of, especially from the fitness guy to the best-selling author to the breath work. And there's been this kind of like incredible kind of evolution that you've continued to go on. And I think for so many, that can be quite hard, difficult, and challenging because it feels safe, comfortable, and you feel certain when you operate within certain constraints. And there's, from my own experience, clearly been plenty of times that you've had to now almost like destroy, rebuild, let go of what you've known, and then step into something new. And I like to call that in my world like a regeneration phase is how I kind of frame it for me to be able to kind of gain some, I suppose, control over it. How have you been able to go through that journey, and how have you found that?
Yeah, I think there's better ways of doing it than how I've done it, and I've definitely learned over the years. But it's nice actually for me to see that people see that I've kind of done that because sometimes we look from the outside in, it looks like a smooth transition where someone goes from one thing into the next, and it definitely doesn't feel like that when I'm going through these changes. I suppose ultimately when I was growing up, I was very insecure and lacked a lot of confidence, and fitness was the first thing that gave me confidence. And early on, I decided I was going to be successful and I was going to run a gym and all this kind of stuff. And I got into the fitness industry before Instagram and before all that had taken off. And everyone around me told me I was crazy. I failed with my first business. Then I built a really successful online fitness business. And when that peaked, I was about 28 and I had trained 20,000 people online over 4 years through online training courses and built a gym and done all this stuff. I had created everything I thought I ever wanted. And it's that revolving and evolving thing to some degree. I thought when I achieved things, all my insecurities would fall away and I didn't actually have to look at the insecurities. But when I got to 28, I didn't feel good in myself. I had money, I had a house, I had a car, I had a great girlfriend, I had everything. And I still struggled with my mental health. And so I guess it was out of desperation to some degree that I had to kind of just burn the ships and say, this isn't working. That was at that stage. I do have a life philosophy that supports me well. It requires a bit of trust in God or whoever's looking after us. But my way of seeing life is that we come in here, we choose to live, and God or whoever it is says, okay, I'm going to give you a body, go and have a human experience. And you're sent down here to learn certain lessons. And for you to learn those lessons in this lifetime, you're going to have certain experiences. You're going to have to meet certain types of people, and you're going to have massive challenges. And so you've got a different life curriculum to me, to the next person, to the next person. And so I felt like fitness and that journey that I went through on fitness was there to teach me certain lessons and to help me get out of my own way. And then I felt I was starting to feel uncomfortable again because I had kind of served my time there. It's a bit like school. You don't stay repeating the same class in school 100 times just because. So for me personally, I need that change, and I need to be honest with myself about I'm not in any of this stuff for money. I mean, it's great to have money and we need money and everything else, and I would like to be successful. But primarily, my objective is to honor the deeper part of me that's trying to emerge. Like there's always something trying to emerge out of all of us. So I think you have to have trust. I think you have to have trust and faith. That's ultimately what it is. I suppose a more practical answer to the question, I would work with a lot of people that come to me and they say, I hate my job and I want to start my own business. And they've got young families and mortgages and stuff like that. And I think it would be crazy to just quit your job in the morning and put yourself under that kind of pressure, because then you're going to be coming to your job with a sense of stress that's going to transmute to everything you're doing. So the more practical steps are to do something on the side and block off 2, 3 hours a week to start pursuing this side hustle or the hobby or whatever it is, and have a strategy or a plan to move you toward what you're trying to do. Does that answer the question in some way?
Yeah, 100%. I love that, because I think this is one of the biggest things where it's almost like that sunk cost fallacy, where you're almost playing not to lose. You get to a point where you kind of reach the top of the mountain, and then the higher the mountain, the thinner the air, the smaller the pass, there's less people up there. And then you get to this point and externally it looks like, oh, Pat's made it, or this is how amazing, or he's worked with all these people and it must be absolutely incredible. But internally there's this, I'll speak about myself, as like, I felt lost, disconnected, unfulfilled, frustrated. And there was like this itch that I just kind of hadn't scratched. And what I'd done had served and had been so powerful and had been so like life-changing in so many ways. But I just had this desire and willing and want to be able to open and explore and understand and realize that there was so much more, but I just didn't quite know what that looked like just yet. And it was that confidence to be able to then relinquish control, let go and step into that I think is so difficult to do within the moment, because you're in that messy middle. You're like, you've left this shell and you're now trying to find a new shell. And it's within that I think obviously there's so much uncertainty, because you're moving from a greater degree of safety. And I think this is something that so many people, especially coaches, will find themselves in, even if it's working with a certain type of clientele or working within a certain gym up to a certain point. And then they've almost like grown and evolved and they want to step into something new, but they're almost afraid because of what they've built and what they've created, and it feels comfortable. And that's also something they've now wrapped their identity in. So like for me, that's why I wanted to explore that, because I believe it takes so much. I think it takes so much courage. I wanted to just try and unpack what are some of the key ingredients that have allowed you to do that.
I often reference The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell. Some of your listeners may be familiar. This story arc that's very common across all stories that we tend to connect to is the hero is in their ordinary world. Something happens that forces them into having to go on an adventure. So Harry Potter, Star Wars, your favorite footballer who you know their life story, whoever it might be, their story arc was that they're living their day-to-day life. Either they have a call from within saying something needs to change, or something dramatic happens externally that forces them to change. And then they go on their adventure. And in the movies or in the books, they meet dragons and they slay dragons and they meet mentors, Merlin or whatever the wizard was, and all this kind of stuff. Harry Potter goes on, it has, and then eventually, hopefully, the hero returns and there's kind of a new sense of who they are and they can help the people around them. Our version of the hero's journey is we're in our comfortable life where we're maybe discontent, but things are working and everything's fine. We're not so inspired that we have to change. We're not so desperate that we need to change. And so we're kind of in that, I don't know what they call it, but that I think someone called it the curse of the middle class or something like that, where things aren't so bad that I need to create massive change, and things aren't so good that I have to create massive change. But our version of slaying dragons and going on the adventure, confronting the parts of ourselves that we're afraid of. So this is where the shadow comes back in. When I stepped away from fitness and I started thinking about being a personal development guy, my shadow was, what are people going to think of me? So it was my fear. It was my shame. Who am I to do this? It was my insecurities. So my hero's journey was to go and confront all those aspects of myself. And now, 10 years on, I can hold space for other people who might be dealing with the same thing. So that's ultimately how it works. As you know, you've gone on a bunch of these cycles yourself, and you get the goods, you come back and you help the tribe, and then maybe it's time for something new.
The best lessons almost have to be experienced in order for them to be fully understood. And at the time, you're almost like, why is this happening to me? But it's actually in hindsight, when you let back and you reflect, it's like, that was the opportunity. That was actually the very thing that was now giving you the tools, the skills, the knowledge, the resilience, whatever traits that now have allowed you to be able to hold space and create a container for others to now be able to go on that journey and do exactly the same, which I absolutely love. There was something that I saw a little while ago, and you spoke about the power of breathing into your balls. When was the last time? When was the last time you breathed into your balls? And what decision? What decision were you able to make? Mate, I love that. I enjoy it. It tickled me greatly. That's now going to basically be Divilly et al. 2024 and everything that I now reference.
Nice. That was a good one. That was I was working with a therapist who is a shamanic practitioner. I was an elder actually. Like I mentioned, I kind of craved that older support who could give me the years of wisdom. And again, back to the hero's journey, you're not going to go to an elder who's just lived this very easy life, who everything's been straightforward. You're going to be more drawn to the guy who's had lost it all and built back up and all, because you'll see a part of yourself in them. But I was working with this guy and he was supporting me through one of these transitions where I was trying to figure out what's my next move, and I was dealing with anxiety of it all. And he said to me, "When do you want to book your next session?" And I said, "Oh, maybe Wednesday." And he said, "Stop." And he said, "Breathe into your balls." He said, "This is not a maybe." He said, "I don't work on maybe." He says, "There's a part of you that has a yes or a no, or has a specific in mind." And it was a good reminder. I think there's a lot of energy required to live in that uncertain, flaky, unboundaried way of being, of kind of, oh, I might do this and I might do this and I might do this. And I certainly fall into that. Even a couple of months ago, chatting to you and kind of figuring out like, where am I going to go next? And thank you for your support during that time. When I decided I'm going all in on breath work, everything changed. So that was a kind of breathing into the balls and saying, okay, let's get out of the land of maybe and into yes or no. It's cheesy, but there is that line, something like the universe will conspire to support you when you decide what direction you're going. And it probably ties into our piece around transition. If you're humming and hawing about where you're going to go next, not much is going to come to you. But the day you decide, okay, this is what I'm doing now, people, circumstances, all that kind of thing. When did I last breathe into my balls? A couple of days ago, getting offered a corporate job and asking myself honestly, the money's good, but do I want to do this? And the answer was no. So I said no because it didn't align with my values.
I love that even over the last few months, I've been able to even just see such a transition and a shift and a change in you with a level of like certainty that you now have in terms of what you're stepping into. And there's just a completely, and I say this all the time, it's like, I think often people are looking for tangibles, but actually there's like this feeling, this sense, this energy, this aura, this vitality, and this lifeblood that you've now got about you because you've been able to go, right, okay, this is where I've been. You got to a point of crossroads where I think we explored. It's like, you have so many skills and expertise and also like passion projects that you could go and explore, that you could step into. And it's like, okay, which course and which direction do I now go and step into? And seeing you now go, okay, this is now basically my North Star that I'm going to go and get after. There's just a completely different level of like calm and control, and just, it's almost like a feeling that you sense. You're like, you walk into a restaurant and you're like, this feels great. And you just now know, and you walk into another restaurant, you're like, the food's good, but there's something a bit different about this place.
Yeah.
And I think that is almost coming back down to what you've communicated earlier around like the inner work and be able to understand oneself and recognizing that there's always going to be a continuation of that work, and it never stops, because you're always going to be bumping up and finding your edge. And then there's always going to be those little regeneration phases you're going to have to go through. Within those moments, what grounds you?
Within wanting to change, or
Yeah, when you're a little bit uncertain, or you're like, right, okay, what direction am I now going to go in? What's my next course of action? And you feel as though maybe for a period of time you lost traction. Like, what gives you that groundedness and that allows you to then be able to a degree, stabilize, to be able to make an informed decision?
yeah, trying to see the bigger picture is part of it. Trying to think about one thing I've noticed over the last couple of years is like I don't really enjoy social media anymore. I know it's part of what needs to be done and stuff like that, but sometimes I just check in with myself in terms of, I'll think of an idea, I'll say I want to do this, but then I think about what's actually required and all the social media I'm going to have to do and all this kind of stuff, and I'm like, okay, that doesn't really. So I try to just think of a bigger picture in that regard of like, what's the lifestyle I want? Is this decision going to support that lifestyle? What's the drawback to this? Because everything we do has got pros and cons, like everything we do. Becoming a multi-billionaire in the morning is going to have some cons, believe it or not. You're not going to know who your friends are anymore. You're not going to know who's really there because they like you. So there's always, and I find that useful to balance my judgments. We tend to polarize where we make things, oh, this is perfect and this is a disaster, but neither are true. I've been to the lowest points of my life and had some gold in there. I've been to the highest points of my life and felt a bit lost. So, um, I think having that bigger picture perspective grounds me. Breath work definitely grounds me. Like I'm a big breath work practitioner and like different body based practices, which are about getting out of the head and more into the body, because your body is kind of your unconscious mind in a way, which might sound a bit strange. But if you meet someone and you've got a funny feeling about them, you feel it in your body. If you have everything you want in your life on paper, but you don't feel good in yourself, your body's trying to speak to you. There's something deeper. So that's how you can start to connect to kind of what's your shadow. Um, what grounds me, breath work, nature, probably the most important one actually is conversations with people who um, will support in those times. I've worked with a lot of men's mental health over the last couple of years. And when you look at male suicide, which is at huge rates in Ireland over the last couple of years, and I'm sure around the world, a big tenet of male suicide and suicide in general is shame. And one of the aspects of shame is the belief that I'm wrong, I'm unlovable, I'm bad, I'm flawed, there's something inherently wrong with me. And the other tenet of shame is that we tend to isolate ourselves when we experience shame. And so guys that are having these beliefs start to push people away. And the more they push away, the more isolated they become, and the more their head starts to mess with them. So on a more day-to-day level, when you get caught in your head or you feel stuck or you feel lost or any of these things, you have to talk. It's such a cliche, but that's probably the most grounding thing for me when I feel a bit stuck or lost is getting all this noise out, or at least getting it on paper and journaling about it.
One thing that I love, there's a book called More Time to Think by Nancy Klein. I think she communicates like the brain that contains the problem also contains the solution to the problem, but actually you never give yourself the space to be able to actually like verbalize and communicate. And so
Nice.
often if you just hold space for somebody, I'm sure you'll be able to have far more case studies than me, but it's like if you can literally just sit in the mud with people, you don't have to say anything, but just by creating that sense of belonging and safety and allowing them the space to be able to communicate, quite often at the end of that conversation, well, that one way dialogue, they've
Mm.
almost come to their own conclusion and they've got the answer that they're now looking for, but they just now needed to have a space that allowed them to verbalize and get off their chest what they now needed to for them to be able to connect the dots. And I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that's so powerful in what it is that you do, we explore and try to do, and just the power of coaching and the impact that can truly have.
I guess the first part of change is awareness and acceptance to some degree. Like I think in 12-step recovery groups, that's one of the first steps is to accept you've got a problem or whatever it might be. And maybe on a more subtle level, if we're going to get support with something, we need to accept that we've got a problem. So we need to say out loud, I feel lost in life. And just that might be, it might seem small, but it's such a huge thing. And to have someone witness that and hear that, everything starts to change. Even like, again, going back to a couple of months when I was kind of deciding what's next, having conversations with the likes of yourself was me taking this kind of ambiguity, what's the word? Ambiguity, or
Yeah.
this lack of clarity in my head and saying, I'm unsure of where I want to go next. And I'm overwhelmed because I've got 10 different things to choose from and I can't decide and I'm afraid to burn the ships. And saying that out loud to yourself, to Phil, to a few others, it's like, okay, I'm going to tackle this now. So yeah, I think it's a great first step.
What impact has martial arts had on Pat and his journey?
It's been huge. I was bullied a lot when I was young, and I struggled with that. And when I was a teenager, I found judo, and it was kind of a funny story. I was obsessed with professional wrestling, obsessed, like right up to my teens. And again, it was probably a projection thing. Talk about that projection of like I was looking on screens, and these guys represented being strong and not being bullied. And I emailed a wrestling school when I was 14. It was like early days of the internet. I had a wrestling website. It's still up online from when I was 13. The last post on my wrestling website from when I was 13 said, due to time commitments, I'm going to have to sell the website for £20 or nearest offer. but but I was obsessed with wrestling and I emailed this wrestling school. I said, when I'm 18, I want to come to wrestling school in the UK. What can I do between now and then to be ready? And they said, start lifting weights and start judo. So you learn how to fall without hurting yourself. And I went into school the next day and there was judo classes. So I started judo classes. Within a couple of months, I won an Irish title, and it really gave me a sense of identity. I was like, oh, I'm the judo guy now, and Then when I was 18, I went to America to become a cage fighter. I spent 6 months in San Diego training full time. And then when I became an adult, I felt like, okay, now you gotta, make money and park all that stuff. And for 10 years I stopped. And at 28, at that time where I was very successful on paper, I didn't have a place where I was going for myself. I didn't have a community outside of my work. I didn't have a passion or anything to switch off from work for. And I went back to jujitsu, and I'm writing a book at the minute. I was just telling this story in the book yesterday of, despite my experience in martial arts, I drove to the class and I walked to the door and I turned around and got back in the car and went home because I was intimidated by going back to the gym. And luckily, the next time I went back, I started again. And for the last, 8, 9 years, I've been training pretty much, 3, 4, 5 times a week, wherever I am in the world. Martial arts has given me community. It's given me um, creativity. It's given me competitiveness. It's given me a fun way of staying in shape because I kind of lost the interest in the gym. It's given me um, a passport around the world, where anywhere you go in the world, you can kind of walk in and meet friends straight away. Um, More than anything, it's probably, this might be a weird analogy, but there's a belt system in martial arts, of course. And you start white, then you go blue, you go purple, you go brown, you go black. I remember being out in Thailand and training, and I just got my blue belt. And you've always got this bit of imposter syndrome where you're thinking, "Oh, am I really a blue belt? Like, did my coach make a mistake?" Because it's all based on performance. It's not like other martial arts where you just get the belt. If you go with the blue belt from anywhere in the world, in theory, you should be at a similar level. So I get my blue belt. I go to Thailand. I train at a place called Tiger Muay Thai a couple of years ago, and I roll with this other blue belt, and he just smashes me, and I go home a bit dejected. And then I look on the Instagram page the next day, and the next night he had gotten promoted to purple belt, which is the next belt up. What it made me realize is you can't compare your chapter of the journey to someone else's because you have no idea where they are in any context, or I come across your work and I start comparing myself to Joe, like you're a million miles away from where I am in some areas, and I'm a million miles away from you are in other areas. And so martial arts taught me we're only competing with ourselves, but we need other people to bump up against in order to better understand ourselves.
How important has that been for you as we said this, you spoke about obviously the entrepreneur and you don't see yourself as an entrepreneur, but quite often that entrepreneurial kind of spirit and journey is quite a lonely road. Like
Mm.
how integral has that now been as an anchor point in terms of just community collaboration and just that togetherness and that sense of belonging when maybe for periods of time, obviously in that entrepreneurial journey, you felt lost and isolated?
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, I studied with Gabor Mate a couple of years ago, a amazing trauma and addiction specialist. He's quite renowned now, and a lot of Gabor's work is around looking at addiction, and rather than judging the addiction or shaming the addiction, trying to figure out like what's driving this. And his thing is that certain addictions are kind of frowned upon. So you see someone on the street injecting with heroin, and you think, oh, they're a junkie, or that's what society tends to lean toward. But the next street over, there's a businessman going in his suit and he's addicted to work, but it's seen as a good thing or whatever. But Gabor kind of says all addictions are addictions. They're an attempt to escape pain. But the reason I bring it up is that when I look back to my 20s, I was drinking a lot. Um, I suppose socially and normal for Ireland or whatever, but it felt out of integrity for me that every weekend I'd go and I get blackout drunk, and I would shame myself and judge myself for that. But then when I went to Gabor's work, I started looking at it from a different lens and I asked myself, what was that giving me? Because everything we do gives us something, even if it doesn't make sense. And this can be useful for, personal training clients to look at them and say, okay, help them understand, what does binge eating give you? Okay, it helps me to numb myself from feelings that I don't want to feel. It gives me a sense of pleasure through the food. So you would outline what's it giving you. And so for me, when I looked at drinking in my 20s, what it was giving me was a social circle because all my friends were in the pub. It was giving me a way of quietening my really busy mind because I struggle with a busy mind all the time. And it was giving me a place where I didn't have to be the boss because I've gone from being broke to having 5 staff in the space of a year. So it was a very different way of living. When you get clear on what something's giving you, you can find healthier ways of meeting the same needs. So I don't really drink anymore. But jujitsu does the exact same thing for me. It quietens my busy mind. It gives me a place where I don't have to be the boss, and it allows me a sense of connection and community. So I think it ticks the boxes. We all have needs in life, and when we don't meet our needs, we experience difficult feelings, and it's just a different way of thinking about it. So If you're feeling sad, you're feeling depressed, you're feeling lost, you're feeling anxious, rather than making those things wrong, just ask yourself, what is it that I need that I'm currently not getting? Maybe I need clarity. Maybe I need support. Maybe I need healthy food. Who knows, you know?
Yeah, what an incredibly powerful question to explore. Having worked with so many incredibly successful, powerful individuals that are seen to obviously be doing externally incredibly well,
Mm.
what do you believe are some of like their key characteristics or traits that obviously now make them who they are?
Mm. I think success is a byproduct of doing something you're genuinely passionate about and something you really enjoy and putting your energy into it, as opposed to looking at the market and trying to figure out what's popular. You'll know this from the years that we've spent in fitness and different areas is, I think the internet opens as, oh, laptop lifestyle and all this kind of stuff became a thing years ago. And then everyone wanted to be a personal trainer for a while. And then it was coaching and everyone wanted to be a coach. And I think if it's genuinely what you want to do, you go and you pursue it, and you can achieve a lot of success. But I think other people, I mean, every week I have people email me and they say, I'm a doctor or I'm an accountant or and I want to become a coach. And I'm like, oh, I'm like, absolutely go for it if it's what you want to do. But maybe you're looking at it through rose tinted glasses and thinking it's going to give you everything. And so I think you got to, Steve Jobs had a quote years ago and he said, look, you have to be crazy. Or so you have to be in love with the thing because it's going to require so much energy and so much effort that you have to love it. Otherwise your life's going to be quite difficult. And I think that's true. We can choose what we suffer for. Like growing my fitness business, I did hundreds of free talks around the world, around the country, I should say. I smashed myself for years to achieve, but it made sense because it was something I was passionate about. If I had gone into the corporate world, I also would have had to put myself through massive grind and I might have gotten successful, but it wouldn't have been for something I was passionate about. So I think that's a differentiating thing. You're going to struggle, so choose something that feels worth struggling for. Um, what else is I think successful people bring a sense of certainty to their clients that they will help them go from A to B with whatever it is. So they're clear on who their client is, what the problem is, how they can offer solutions. Mm, it's a good question. I'm not sure.
If we flip that on its head, what's the dark side that people don't necessarily see? Or not necessarily dark side, but even like what's the opposite that potentially behind closed doors that people don't necessarily appreciate or acknowledge?
I often talk about the sense of wounding or worth. What's driving you in life? Is it a sense of wounding or is it a sense of worth? Being driven by a sense of wounding is the unconscious belief that there's something wrong with me. I'm bad. I'm unlovable. I'm flawed. I'm going to be found out. Imposter syndrome, strong inner critic, all that kind of stuff. That's the wounding. So that drives. And I had a lot of that in my 20s. I went and ran marathons, half Ironmans, stuff I didn't want to do, but I was just trying to impress other people. I was trying to take I'm the fitness guy. Okay, I need to be in fitness shape and I need to be this and I need to be this. I was driven by a lot of insecurity in that regard. And I often say that it was kind of like I would climb a mountain and I'd get to the top and achieve the thing. And then there'd be 100 more mountains. I was like, oh, I'm on the wrong mountain. I need to go again. And it was just exhausting. So that's wounding. There's something wrong with me, but if I achieve this thing, I'll feel better about myself. You achieve the thing and it's not enough and you have to do more. So that's the addiction to achievement and to who am I without my achievements is a scary question for the wounded person, the person operating from wounding. Worth is, I think, a mistake or something sometimes people think is, well, if I loved myself unconditionally, I'd just stay at home and I wouldn't do anything. But worth is a sense of, I believe in myself. I'm a good person. I've got lots of ups and lots of downs. I've got everything in between. And so I choose to do these things. So again, it's the difference between me looking at your Instagram and saying, okay, Joe's doing high rocks and he's doing these things. He looks happy. So I should probably do the same thing as Joe. And it's like, no, because that's not authentic. That's me trying to follow someone else's path. So the dark side is potentially, I think the dark side with it all is letting the outside world dictate our values, our hopes, our aspirations, our desires, rather than being quiet and listening from the inner world and listening to like what's true for me.
What was the last mountain that Pat climbed where he got to the summit and he was like, is this it? Now what?
Oh, you ask good questions, Joe. um, Possibly Thailand. I mean, I went to Thailand at the start of the year and I had intentions of going out there for 5 or 6 months. And I was measured, like before going out there, I felt like this is not going to be the answers to like everything for me and it's not going to be perfect and stuff like that. But there was probably a part of me that was thinking, oh, it's going to be great out there. Because the challenge I have living in Galway, which is a relatively small place and being single at 36, um, is socially it can be kind of difficult because a lot of my friends would be married and that kind of thing, and it rains a lot in Galway, and it's maybe not the best place for someone as they get a bit older. Socially, I mean, I've got my work and everything here, and I do love my life here. I thought going to Thailand, I'm going to be on Fight Island where there's thousands of gyms, and there was probably a sense of, oh, life's going to be much easier there. I'm just going to train all the time, and I'm going to write my book in the morning and stuff like that. And some of that was true. But there was definitely a realization as well that, there's nowhere in the world you can go and run away from yourself. The same stuff you don't like about yourself here, you won't like about yourself somewhere else. So you're better off doing the work on yourself so that you can love yourself wherever you go.
I love that honesty, mate, and I can massively appreciate that. If it goes where you go, and I think that's absolutely the biggest thing. I'm always very, very, very intrigued by anybody who has the discipline to be able to sit and write.
Mm.
You've obviously already written a best-selling book, BitMind, and
Mm.
now obviously exploring the next.
Mm.
What's that taught you and given you, and what lessons around life has that allowed you to appreciate from exercising that discipline and I suppose creating something that's bigger and greater than you?
Yeah. I just wrote for an hour actually before we chatted today. The biggest thing I've got, um, two things. One is I've heard Paul Moore talk about this in the past that his belief, to some degree, I think I shouldn't speak for other people, but I do remember him saying something to the effect of people that experience anxiety oftentimes are very creative, and when they don't express that creativity, anxiety kind of follows. So it's almost like the anxious mind creates problems, but if you give yourself problems to solve, you almost entertain that mind, and so you're helping it. So there's something in that, I think, that I definitely noticed that the more I create, whether it's courses or books or whatever it is, I feel more fulfilled because like, okay, I'm not just accumulating life experience and reading books for the sake of reading books and accumulating life experience. I'm actually transmuting it into something that could potentially help people. But the biggest thing with the book is that you've kind of got two parts. You've got internally, I mean, by this, you've got the writer and you've got the editor. Or for someone creating an online course, they've got the course creator and then they've got maybe the editor, same kind of idea. And the mistake a lot of us will make is we let the editor try to write the book. So every line's look at, oh, let's make this, oh, that, oh. You're just looking at a blank page because you can't get it perfect straight off the bat. So the way that I write now is I tell my editor, internal editor, to stay outside of the room for the next hour. And I just brain dump on paper and I'll dump 1,000 words minimum. And that's my first draft. And then I rewrite that 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 times and then I make it pretty. So I think the metaphor for that in life is that don't look for perfection. Do it, see what works, see what doesn't work, do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. I think that's how I write now. And it was the other piece then is I send it to my publisher, they give me feedback, and then okay, so I'm getting some feedback from someone I trust. Now I'm going to edit it again. So it's don't wait for perfect. Um, the other piece I'm learning, I think, is bringing more of myself into it. That anyone can write a book, and AI can write a book, and ChatGPT can write a book now at this stage. So what people are really looking for is you and your energy through it. If I read a book by you, Joe, I don't want to read, 10 strategies for marketing. I want to hear how it showed up in your life, where it worked, where it didn't work, all that kind of stuff. So I think having the belief in yourself to share more yourself and not see it as silly. But the biggest thing is the editor and the writer are two different parts. Yeah.
I think so often being yourself can feel like such a big risk
Mm.
because you feel exposed and you almost feel like you're walking down the road naked because for the first time you're actually showing all of yourself. And I suppose in the online instant gratification world, you can get an immediate kind of return in terms of how that's been received. Whereas obviously in this world, there's a huge delayed level of gratification that you now have to be able to go through, that you're obviously working on this masterpiece and this art.
Mm.
And then obviously you're putting that out to the world potentially, 6, 12, 18, 24 months later, whatever it now is, almost then in anticipation and waiting for, right, okay, what's that feedback going to look like? How have you been able to process and just align yourself to that?
Um, it was interesting. I was in the coffee shop this morning. I was writing the book and chatting to the barista in there who I know well, and they know that I'm writing the book and so and how's it going and all this kind of thing. And I looked behind the coffee machine and there was a stack of books there. And I said, when you write a book, you come to realize that each of those books that you see there, or every one of the books on the bookshelf, or the thousands and tens of thousands of books in a bookshop, to us, they're just books. It's just like there's lots of books. For the person who wrote that, there's probably at least a year of their life gone into that thing. Um, so that's kind of, in one way, it's like, it's scary. You're like, oh, I'm going to put a year of my life into this. I'm going to share more of myself than I've ever shared publicly. It's out in print paper where if I get something wrong or if I do say something that's too much, I'm not able to retract it. So there's that element of it, which I guess is a little bit scary. Then there's the other bit where there's got to be humility. And for me, it's like, I'm definitely getting much more comfortable. I don't really care what people think of me, which might sound a bit blasé or whatever. There's a few people I care about. I care about my family and my friends that are close to me because they've always known me and they'll tell me if I'm gone wrong. I care about mentors and people that I trust who I go to for advice because I'm going to them for a reason. I care about my paying customers that come to me. Those are kind of the main people. But outside of that, I'm not going to try to impress everyone or win everyone over because you'd be exhausted. And to your point about showing who we really are, I wore I wore a mask for I think I've brought a good bit of myself to my work over the years, but there was definitely times where I was wearing masks when I was doing the fitness thing. I started out a fitness class and didn't really think anything was going to come of it. Part of me did, part of me didn't. A year later, I'm on the telly and I'm the fitness guy on the telly. And I used to drive to the telly and I'd be thinking in my head, how does a fitness guy dress? And I'd be looking at the previous fitness guys that were on the show and I'd be like, what do they want to talk about? And all this kind of stuff. And the host would ask me, oh, we've got a question from Jane who's wondering, what should she do to flatten her tummy? And rather than being authentic and saying what I thought, I would go to my head and the editor would step in and say, what does the fitness person want me to say? And I felt so inauthentic. And the problem with being inauthentic is when people compliment you, they're not really complimenting you, so it doesn't land. When people criticize you, you kind of got a sense of, oh, that wasn't really me. So there's kind of that resentment there as well. At least when you're yourself and you put yourself out there in an honest way, you'll have people that downplay it and don't like you, and have people that like you, but at least it's real.
Mate, what you've just said in the last 30 seconds hits hard, so
Okay.
hard, because for me, I spent so much of my life, obviously, in the fitness world, initially thinking, who do I need to be?
Mm,
What role do I now need to play? What do I
yeah.
need to say? Not what do I want to talk about, but what do I need to say in that I believe that insert X people now want to hear?
Yeah.
And you go around basically second guessing and questioning absolutely everything. And within those moments, you lose so much energy and also confidence within oneself. And then you almost can't remember the breadcrumbs that you've left because you're almost, you've been kind of chopping and changing based upon the external instead of the internal.
Mm,
And when you do that, I believe that's where there's so much like instability. I know for me, it's like so much instability. And there was this constant thought of like, when's this going to be taken from me? When am I going to get found out? And that was like a constant narrative. And that basically led me to a point of then having no boundaries, no barriers, looking at, right, okay, how do I now please everybody? And not wanting to let anybody down because the entirety of my self-worth is measured through what other people thought about me rather than actually how I treated, respected, and looked after myself and how I saw myself in the mirror when I closed the door at the end of every single day.
mm.
You know,
This maybe comes back to what we talked about earlier when you asked what is a tenet of a successful person. It's a life driven from the inside out rather than the outside in. I think that's part of it. Um, Again, maybe use James Smith as an example. He's blown up in the fitness industry the last couple of years. If people are comparing themselves or trying to do what he's done, similar to what you're saying there, you're always going to feel like you're going to get found out, or you're going to feel like you're not doing enough, or you're going to filter yourself through the lens of, should I be doing what Joe Wicks or James or whoever it might be has done?
Yeah.
But he got to where he is by embracing all of his self, I guess.
Was there an aha moment for you that changed that, or was it more of a gradual process of then the continual work that you were able to do?
There was definitely one like that was impactful. I certainly still crawl back into my box. I think it's important that we recognize that it's a self-preservation tool to think what do people want from me and stuff like that, and to edit ourselves. And it's not necessarily bad. It makes complete sense a lot of the time from a therapeutic standpoint for us to step into different roles. Like I'm different with you to how I am with my family, to how I am with a girl I'm on a first date with, to how I am with the guy. We shift in and out of different roles to some degree. Now, hopefully, there's a degree of kind of, I don't know, transparency throughout all those roles, and we're not too different, but to be appropriate, it's important that we. Um, when I started doing public speaking years ago, because I was terrified, I was so scared, I was so shy, so nervous, so insecure, and it was interesting because I built the online fitness business, and then people would meet me in person. I was great behind the camera. I could not great, but I was energetic, and I put on this kind of facade, almost like Joe Wicks. No, I'm not saying he is a facade, but I was trying to elicit that kind of energy of yeah, let's go. And then people would meet me, they'd be like, holy fuck, this guy is like, this guy is like super timid or nervous or whatever it might be. And I knew public speaking was an edge for me, and I knew I needed to lean into that, and I wanted to overcome the fear. And so I set out to do 100 free talks in a year, and I'd speak in schools, colleges, big businesses, small businesses. I ended up speaking in some elderly lady's shed. She told me she had a gym, and I went turn up, and it's just like her and her friends in a shed. So I spoke all over the place. I ended up doing 88 talks for free in a year. And my strategy was I had a 60-minute slideshow. I had 60 slides, and I'd slowly go through each one so that I wouldn't run out of stuff to say. And I showed up for one talk. It was the biggest talk I'd done, a couple of hundred people, um, in a student college auditorium. I was nervous, and I started clicking next on the slideshow, and none of the slides worked. And I was desperately trying to get the slideshow to work so I could fill my hour. And the organizers came and said, "Look, you're just gonna have to go." So I just started talking, and I finished my slides within like there was no slides. So I finished the 60-minute talk in like 10 minutes, world record speed. And I was like, does anyone have any questions? And there was just silence in the room. And then I just started speaking from the heart. And I spoke from the heart for the next hour. And the feedback I got was, wow, that was really good. That was really good. And I was like, oh wow. For me to be told speaking from the heart was really good was affirming. I was like, oh, I can do more of this. Versus if I'd done the slideshow for the next 10 years and never really felt because again, people could say, "Oh, that was great. I loved all the information you gave us." But people are not wanting information; they want inspiration, I think, and transformation.
Yeah, a connection. I think when you
Yeah.
can when you can see somebody for who they are and they almost expose themselves in that level of aspiration, but also vulnerability,
Yeah.
it then allows somebody to. Now I say this all the time. I say, like, who do you trust the most in your life? Why do you trust that person the most in your life? It's like, well,
Mm,
because I know the most about them. And when you look at it through that, it's like, so if you're now somebody who's trying to build a business, it's like, whether you like that or not, like for me, like that now, especially in the economy and the climate that we're currently in, trust is the number one currency. And in order
mm,
for you to be able to build trust, you have to now be able to, like I say, open and allow yourself to be seen, which then allows others to feel seen and heard and understood because you're creating that container, which is
mm,
people like us do things like this. And when you
mm,
do that, that becomes that magnet that then I believe just attracts and just brings the types of people that align to that to you. And that's
mm,
when I believe you create something that's so powerful.
mm. And
And
I
that,
think, sorry, yeah, I was
no,
going to
you
say,
go.
tying a few of our things today, few of the kind of things we're talking about, revolving or evolving. Revolving, if I keep doing the slideshow, metaphorically speaking, I think I'm progressing, but it's just a different slideshow. It's the same way of hiding from the world. Evolving is I push myself just to maybe do a video where I'm a 10% more open than I usually am and 10% more. And I get direct feedback. Think, wow, that landed. And that helps me to build trust in myself as I build trust in the other person. And then I start to evolve and then I can lean in more in and more in, more in. Same as the other analogy we had with the writing was rather than trying to get it perfect, we put something out there and then we refine it and we refine it and we refine it. And I think it's the same for this kind of thing of we build trust in ourselves by stepping slowly into the unknown, getting feedback, adjusting based on the feedback, and then taking another little step, another little. That's been my life for the last 10 years. I would say is the slow, gradual steps that over time look like, oh wow, different chapters.
Amazing, mate. I've absolutely loved this conversation. And I said to you before this, we could probably have a 2, 3, 4 hour discussion. One final question that I'd love to kind of just close this episode and close the loop on. What was the last thing that Pat changed his mind about?
What's the last thing I changed my mind about? You ask good questions, Joe. Yeah. I'm struggling with that. What's yours, Joe? Go and buy some time for myself.
The biggest thing that I changed my mind about was, how do I want to live instead of how do I achieve more? And for me, it was that thought process of like, because I said that this is what I was going to do, this is now what I needed to do, but actually being okay with accepting and allowing myself just to be able to go, right, okay, that's what I thought that I wanted. I've explored it. And right now, actually, my values and what's important to me and actually how I want to live is actually now different to what that now, is. And it's okay. And it's powerful for me to be able to surrender and let go and be okay with stepping away from that, to be able to step into other aspects and other more important areas of my life right now, instead of thinking that now, because this is what I said, you have to do what you say that you do. It was just being okay with going, this is what I thought that I wanted, but right now, based upon where I am and the exploration that I've done and the position that I sit within, actually what's more important to me is actually now this. I think that's the biggest thing that I've changed my mind on.
Nice. I don't know if this is directly changing mind on. It's something I'm trying to it's a fundamental belief I'm trying to instill a bit more. I don't know, is belief the right word? An attitude, I guess I'm trying to bring more to life, is to fall in love with the boring. There's a part of me that is so curious and intrigued by new places and new courses and new modalities and new people even. And I also recognize that that sometimes keeps me on the surface or keeps me in that land of maybe that we talked about earlier. So I'm trying to fall in love with the boring day to day things with the recognition that that's where we find depth, whether it's falling in love with the basics in jiu-jitsu or falling in love with the basics of business or falling in love with the basics of a typical day to day routine here in Galway rather than traveling around the world. So I think I'm trying to change my mind. I've definitely had a shift in that regard, that a life well lived is about less and not about more.
Mate, I love that. Buddy, I've absolutely loved this conversation. Thank you so much for your wisdom, your energy, and
Thank you.
everything you bring, everything you continue to do. I value our friendship enormously. And
Me too.
I'm really, really excited for what's to come and where you're going to take things. If people are interested or curious about more of what Pat does and the multitude of different things that you are an expert within, where's the best place for them to be able to go and find out and explore more?
Thank you, Joe. And again, thank you for the energy you bring to everything in the sport you've given me over the last couple of months. It's been great to get to know you. Patdivilly.com is my website. And yeah, just reach out if you need any guidance.
Team, if you found this podcast insightful, beneficial, or you believe that just one person may potentially take something from the wisdom that Pat shared today, I would absolutely love it. And we'd absolutely love it if you could share away. It would mean the absolute world to us. Until next time, I love you all. Have an incredible morning, afternoon, evening, whatever you're up to. And I look forward to catching up soon.